You guys were asked what was your favorite article of the Constitution. Mine is Article 6, because that's the one that states that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Mwahaha. Okay. I was asked after the last class how to get information from me. My website's there in the bottom. If you don't want or can't see that, come see me later and I'll get you one of my cards that has that. Is the sound level okay in the back?
No. A little louder.
It's on. That's the length. This is the twist. I haven't gotten to that one yet. I almost got beamed by the mic. Okay, now how's the sound level in the back? Better? Do I need to speak into the mic loudly? Yes. All right. I was speaking into the mic and they said it wasn't loud enough, so now I'll speak into the mic. All right, back to where we were. If you need to get a hold of me, there you go, constitutiondecoded.com, right? Ba-dum-cha. So is it constitutional? Is on applying the Constitution. Why do we bother to study the Constitution? Why bother? If we're not going to learn it, if we're not going to use it, if we're not going to analyze it, if we're not going to apply it, we might as well have been taking a nap. And I know some of you have been. But I run my monthly study groups, and I get questions all the time from the grown-ups saying, but what about this? How does the Constitution apply to this? And with some of these folks, God bless them, they've been coming to my classes for a couple of years every month, and I'm thinking to myself, you really ought to be able to do this on your own by now. Shh, don't tell them I said that, all right? So I want all of you to be able to look at something that's going on either historically or currently and say, how does the Constitution actually apply to this? What constitutional principles are at work here? How should this be happening? How should this be handled as opposed to what's probably going on, which is most likely not in accordance with the Constitution? There was a talk that I listened to just a few weeks ago on being battle ready. It was a great conference, but one of the lines that really struck me was one of the speakers who said, train for the fight you are not yet in. Because by the time that fight starts, it's too late to train. Most of us grown-ups here are already in the fight, and we're trying to train while we're fighting. Most of you guys are in the periphery of the fight, but you're not in it all in yet. Train for that fight and be ready for it. The Constitution has been under attack just about since the day it was ratified, but in the last 100 years, it's been under very serious attack. Let's do a real quick review here just so that when we're thinking about things, we've got an idea of where we're going to go to look for those constitutional principles that we're then going to try to apply. We've got the Declaration of Independence, which is part of the organic laws of the United States. So the Declaration of Independence is the law. We've got the Constitution, which is the law. Article 1 is the powers and duties of Congress. Article 2, the powers and duties of the executive branch. Article 3, powers and duties of the judiciary. Article 4 is federal and state interactions. Where are those lines between what the states do, what the federal government does, when states are arguing with the federal government or with each other, what happens then? Article 5 is the the way to amend the Constitution because they knew when they were writing it, remember it says a more perfect union. They knew they weren't going to get to perfect, and they knew there were going to be situations that needed fixing. They gave us a way to do that. Article 6 states that the Constitution and the laws pursuant to it and treaties made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. Keep in mind the limitations. It doesn't say any law Congress comes up with, and it doesn't say any treaty that happens to slide by the Senate. It says the Constitution, laws that are made in accordance with the duties and limits placed on the federal government, and treaties which have been properly ratified that also come under areas where the federal government is given authority. Those are the supreme law of the land. Important limitations that nobody pays attention to. Article 7 was the procedure for ratification, and then we've got amendments 1 to 27. Do you guys learn Roman numerals? Okay, good. Just making sure, you never know, I mean, these days. So, current circumstances. We've got Black Lives Matter, Antifa, the fascist group that calls itself anti-fascist. Then we've got, and gee, think, this was like done 2 weeks ago and it's already out of date. Right? We can talk about other issues too, but Chaz or Chop or whatever they were calling themselves before they finally got shut down, and only now they've moved to Portland. It's like Italy changing governments. It keeps shifting. So, what are the duties and powers of the states and the cities? And I'm not going to stand here and talk this through. You guys are going to be talking through it with me. When may the federal government step in to fix things? When must the federal government step in? What difference does it make in those whens and when musts if the organizations involved are officially labeled as domestic terror or domestic enemies of the state or foreign agents acting within the United States, and what is guaranteed to the states in Article 4, Section 4. So let's talk about it. What are the duties and powers of the states and the cities in terms of unrest and violence and people trying to burn down police stations and throw people out of their stores? What are the duties and powers of the cities and the states? Yes, sir. And you'll need to speak up.
The states are supposed to deal with most of those, and I'm going to get to that.
The states are supposed to deal with them, yes. There was another, yes, sir.
Stand up, please.
Yes, that would be helpful to me.
We'll stand up. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to encourage.
It helps me to see you too, because otherwise you get lost in a sea of faces and shoulders and seat backs.
All right. Well, they could deploy the National Guard basically to a lot of cameras.
They could deploy the National Guard. Now, is that a power of the state or a power of the city?
It's a power of the state.
Power of the state. And your comment was, were you talking about powers of the states or of the cities?
What depends, I think it's at a city level, they have the police. So yeah, it's the city level.
City has the power of policing. If it's too much for the police, then the mayor can call the governor and get the National Guard activated and sent in. In this instance, what does the National Guard act as? Think Second Amendment. Yes?
The militia?
They are acting as the militia. Is the National Guard the same thing as the militia? Correct, they are not. They would like you to think that they are. They are not. What is the duty and power of the city in regards to violent groups? Yes, sir, Mr. Affleck. Stand, please. I know, you're big and tall, but still.
The cities have the right to disband gatherings of violent groups if they feel like it's a threat to the people around them.
He said the cities have the power to disband violent groups if they think that they're a danger to the people around them. What is the right guaranteed to the people in the First Amendment?
But to peaceably assemble.
Peaceably to assemble is raiding, to use Debbie Bacigalupi's choice earlier, raiding a Louis Vuitton store or burning down a Wendy's or smashing into a Starbucks. Is that peaceably assembling? No. How about setting fire to somebody's house? Is that peaceably assembling? No. So the right of the people peaceably to assemble, what would that look like? Somebody over on this side for a change. Now, if you're going to protest something, what is your right peaceably to assembly? Yes, ma'am. March for Life is an example. Right. A friend of mine told me many years ago that the Washington, D.C. police call the Tea Party and other conservative groups that come down there to hold rallies and protests cupcakes, because they're so polite. They bring snacks for the officers whose job it is to guard them, and wherever they're gathering, they leave the places cleaner than they were when they left, when they gathered. How does that compare to what's been going on in Seattle and Portland and Atlanta and? Are they leaving the places cleaner than they started? No. So, the powers and the duties of the cities and the states are to protect, remember, to secure these rights, governments are instituted. What's the first right of the people? The one without which you don't have anything. Yes, sir.
The freedom to gather and worship.
Freedom to gather and worship is certainly important, but you can still exist without those. So, what is the absolute first right that you have?
Assemble? Basically assemble.
You're overthinking it. Yes, sir.
Your right to life.
Life. Without that one, just like nothing else to worry about, right? So if the job of government is to protect the rights of the people, and the first one of those is your right to exist, is it the job of the cities and the states to protect your life when it is threatened by violent bands of thugs intent on murder, mayhem, arson, beating, robbery, rape, theft, looting? Is it this job of the city to protect you? Is it the job of the state to protect you if it gets out of hand and the city can't manage it? And what do you do if the city and the state won't do that? I'm sorry? When may the federal government send in the reserves, basically?
I guess when if it's across multiple states and it can't be handled by the states themselves, then you need more.
Okay, and what is your, and again, stand up. Declared national emergency, we have a comment, and when, yes, sir.
Is it when the governors call in the?
When the governors call in, yes, that's another real, yes, sir?
You have the right to defend yourself if somebody goes to out of hand, you know.
Tell that to the couple in Missouri who've just been arrested, but yes, you have the right. And Missouri has a castle law too, believe it or not. There's a district attorney who needs to be taken out of office. Anybody over here want to comment? Or did the guys say it all? We really did segregate here. The girls are over here and the guys are over here. All right, so there's the duty for the cities and the states to defend their population. If they can't handle it, the governors have the authority to call in the National Guard to do the job that the cities and the states can't handle. The federal government must step in When? Not may, but must. Is this when we go to Article 4, Section 4? The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and, on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. So the federal government actually can't go in without a call from the legislature of the state or the governor of the state, unless those organizations now become enemies of the United States and have been labeled as domestic terrorists, foreign actors, etc. So that's the difference here between may step in and must step in, is when these organizations are demonstrated to actually be avowed enemies of the United States or instigated, agitated, and funded by foreign enemies of the United States. Yes, you had a question. Please stand.
So I know that the National Guard steps in when the state can't do it itself, but could they, if the National Guard wasn't enough, could they use, say, the Army or the Marine Corps?
Could they use the Army or the Marine Corps if the National Guard isn't enough? The National Guard would be enough. You get into issues of what they call posse comitatus, which is there are laws against using the United States military against citizens of the United States. But again, all that changes if we're not talking about a citizen uprising, but are rather talking about foreign actors pretending to be Americans. All right? And I'm not saying that there's like, a magic, this is the situation, boom, switch flips, now send in the Army. Right? There's all kinds of gray areas and who's in charge and, is it this bad yet? And has the legislature been called? Well, what? But this is the sort of analysis you should be doing, right? One of the things that happened with the whole Chaz Chop thing is that at first everyone was castigating the president for not sending in the Army or the National Guard. But what he actually did was right. He stood back and said, okay, states, this is a federal system. This is your gig. You figure it out. Call me if you need help. And then, of course, they turned around and castigated him for not sending in the Army that they were castigating him for supposedly sending in that he hadn't sent in. Because orange mad bad. There was something over on this side? Yes, ma'am. Stand, please.
So when it gets to the point where everything's in such a flux that it has to get to a certain point, who would be the one who's in charge of sending in the Army, or who is the final person that gets to say, we have to send in the Army or we're sending in the National Guard?
Who gets the final say? That's a good question. And I think it has to be situation dependent, right? If you have a mayor or a governor who actually cared about fulfilling their functions and protecting the lives and property of the people that they were elected to protect, they would act quickly to quell violence against their citizens and their citizens' property. If things do get out of hand, then it goes up the next step to the governor or the state legislature that can call in the National Guard. If the National Guard can't handle it, then they have other conversations. Right? All right, let's move on. Destruction of statues. And again, what are the duties of the states and the cities? When may the federal government step in? Whose tactics include the removal of all history? You ought to be able to get that one because there have been a couple of people who've talked about that in quite some detail in earlier classes. And what do these groups, whose tactics include the removal of all history, do with the people who were rioting and pulling down statues if and when these groups actually take control. So, again, states and cities, what's their job? To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Stand.
It would be most likely state or city property, so they would have to.
State or city property, could be private property. Yes, sir.
I mean, isn't it also tax paid? So it would be also a attack against the property of individuals who work for them.
Keep in mind, from our declarations and preambles talk from last year, that all rights are based in property. Starting with the first piece of property you have the day you were born, which is your own body, and expanding out from there. Right? You have your own person, you have the things that you've personally made, you have your intellectual property, and then you have this sort of larger, more tenuous public property that your life's efforts have gone to pay to purchase and or maintain. And the government's job is to protect the property rights of the citizens. Yes, sir.
I don't know if this would be a bit of a stretch, but you've also got the UNESCO World Heritage, the whole organization behind maybe some of the sites.
There could be UNESCO things in there, but the less we have to do with the UN, the happier I am.
Yeah.
That building would make a really nice shelter for homeless veterans, just saying. So the duties of the states and the cities remain the same: to protect the lives and the property of the citizens, including property paid for by public funds or private property displayed publicly. So that's their duty. When may the federal step in? We're going to have the exact same thing when the cities and states can't handle it and they ask the federal government to step in. If those statues or monuments are federal property, then whose responsibility is it to act in the first instance, in the first place? Come on, I gave you the answer while I was asking the question. Yes, sir.
Government.
Which one? The local, the city, the state, the county, the federal?
State.
If it's federal property?
No. I don't know.
The federal government. If it's property that is owned by the federal government, it's the federal government's job to protect that property. Right? That's why there are now orders to arrest and prosecute those who are defacing federal statues. Right? So, whose tactics include, as usually a very close to the first step, the removal of all history of a group? Yes, sir.
Communist revolutions.
Communist revolutionaries. One of the first things they do is they destroy every bit of prior history and start with year zero, basically. Nothing existed before the party because the party is supreme. Yes, sir.
A perfect example would be Mao Zedong and the Great Cultural Revolution.
Mao Zedong and the Great Cultural Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Venezuela, Cuba, Cambodia, just go down the list. And they pull down the statues, right? So if we stipulate for the sake of argument that it is Marxist groups, and this is provable by history, but we stipulate that it's Marxist groups or Marxist-backed groups that are pulling down statues, they're instigating and agitating and getting people all in a frenzy and, rioting, and the statues get pulled down, and they manage to cause enough disruption that they take over. What do those groups then do with the people who are doing the rioting? Hint, lead is cheap. These people are proven to be violent. They are proven to be easily roused to act in a violent manner in public. And when you are trying to consolidate your power hold on a country, the best thing to do is to take all those violent protesters, line them up by a ditch, and put one piece of lead in the back of each of their heads. If you have bigger pieces of lead, you stack them 2 deep and get them 2 for 1. Thump, bulldozer fills in the ditch, you're done. That's why they call them useful idiots. They don't know anything about history, and they do not know that they are the first ones up against the ditch to get the bullet in the back of the head. Cannon fodder is another word for them. They will get hauled off and shot for their pains before resistors like conservatives will get hauled off and shot. Because the first thing that these Marxist groups want to do is to make sure that these violent thugs are not around to interfere with their plans, and they make a really good example to the rest of the population that if you don't shut up and do what we tell you, you're going to end up like them. Bang, thud, your history. Oh, wait, we don't have any history. I guess you never existed. All right. Quarantines and lockdowns. What are the duties of the states and the cities? Yes, sir.
Not to do that?
Maybe. You had a comment?
I'm pretty sure it's like, it's a city, it's on a city level that they have the right to lock down a city, and then possibly a state.
Where does the word quarantine come from? Anybody know?
I don't know.
It comes from Venice, 40 giorni. When the Black Plague was coming in from the Far East, the Republic of Venice would make trading ships coming from eastern ports stay at anchor for 40 giorni, days. Because anybody sick or going to get sick, sickened and died in that time, and then they could come into port and do their trading. So quarantine is to isolate those who are sick or who may be sick and keep them away from the healthy people so the disease doesn't get out in the general populace. Keep in mind, these were the days when they had no idea what caused disease. They thought it was miasma, bad air. Right? So they just made them stay at anchor until people were healthy, proven healthy. So the right of a city or even a state to protect the lives of the other citizens is to quarantine the sick. You don't quarantine the healthy people. You quarantine the sick people. The sick people are the ones who need to be kept away from the healthy people. When may the federal government step in? International border crossings? Okay. One of the things that you used to have to do when you came into this country was, be examined by a doctor to make sure that you didn't have some diseases that were things that we tried to keep out. Right? So, when do the states and the cities cross the line from protecting the lives of the healthy population into acting as tyrants? Yes, ma'am.
When they make quarantine,
Please stand and speak up.
when they make quarantine and masks mandatory?
When they quarantine healthy people, when they make scientifically provably useless measures mandatory, when they forbid doctors on pain of losing their licensing from prescribing drugs that are known to be helpful, and even if they were only suspected to be helpful, we now have a right to try for people who are very ill. Because what can happen if you're about to die and there's a drug that might help you but might kill you? What have you got to lose by trying it? You die 12 hours early? I'm not seeing the problem here, right? Yes, sir. Did you have, yes?
Well, when it's hired, it's just really to gain power to try to enforce these ridiculous things on people. Like, for example, the governor, the mayor of Los Angeles said that he had a phobia of dry sand, so you couldn't spend it at all. That's how much of a paranoid
Yeah. So, if somebody is under the impression that wearing a mask helps keep them healthy, they are welcome to wear a mask. Making everyone wear masks and social distance when we have the example of Singapore that went nuts when the virus first hit them, because they remember very well the SARS virus that had in Singapore a 15% death rate. Right? So they clamped down fast, masks everywhere, mandatory. The virus was still spreading. What they did was they then said, okay, let's try something different. And they instituted an extremely strict hand washing mandate only in hospitals. And the virus transmission rate plummeted to near zero. Look it up for yourself. It's available online. So are all these masks and fines rules? Are they laws? No. Then what are they? Well, mandate is just a way of saying you have to, but who have these mandates been issued by? Governors. Do governors have the authority to make law? So are these laws? No. What do we do with rules that are not laws?
Break them.
Break them, but keep in mind that there may be a price to be paid for the breaking of them. You only break rules when you are willing and able and prepared to pay the cost of breaking them. However, we had the lovely young lawyer who was here the other day who may well be itching to have a case of getting rid of these mandates. Statehood for Washington, D.C. This is one that's being bandied about. To whom can Congress grant statehood? What lands can Congress grant statehood? Yes?
lands that aren't already states.
Lands that are not already states, so that would be like territories?
Yes.
Okay. Or possessions?
Yeah, like Puerto Rico.
Like Puerto Rico, like Guam, like American Samoa, right? So, territories and possessions of the United States. What is the current status of Washington, D.C.? Is it a territory? Yes, sir.
It's a city in Maryland. It's like a city, but it's obviously the capital.
It is the capital, right? I'm looking for it here. It's somewhere here in Article 1, but of course now that I'm looking, it's like not, it's going to hide, right? Article 1, Section 8, the second to the last paragraph, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, become the seat of government of the United States. So Washington, D.C. has a constitutional function and a constitutional role as the seat of government of the United States. It is not a territory, and it is not a possession. So Congress does not have the authority to declare Washington, D.C. a state. If Washington, D.C. wishes to become a state, they need to petition Congress for an amendment to pass 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and then be adopted by 3/4 of the states. And then, and only then, can Washington, D.C. become a state, because it has a special status in the Constitution, which is not one of the statuses that Congress has the authority to make a state from. So again, you find it all in here. Just have to think about it and apply it. Mail-in voting or non-citizen voting. Mail-in voting and non-citizen voting are also known as vote fraud. When does the federal government regulate elections? Article 1, Section 4, and Amendment 12, right? Times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. Remember, senators were chosen by the legislatures. All right, also Amendment 12. Basically, the federal government, and there's also some other sections that talk about the presidential, choosing electors in the presidential elections, okay? The federal government has actually very little say, no say at all over local elections, right? And very little say over federal elections except for times and places, right? So does the federal government have the ability to make laws to increase voter participation? I can't find it in the Constitution. Maybe somebody could invent something. They tend to be good at that. Is voting a right or is it a privilege? Yes, sir.
It's right.
He says it's a right. Who says it's a privilege? All right. Why do you say it's a privilege? Because you have to be an American citizen. Again, we have to look back to Emir de Vattel, when he's in his book where he talks about natural-born citizens and the right of citizens to vote. Also, there's a bunch of different writings in the Federalist Papers. I've listed a number of them here and some of the amendments. In each of these Federalist Papers and amendments, and also in Vattel, voting is always associated with citizenship. Always, always, always. Because you have to be subject to the authority that you're voting on in order to have a voice. Yes, sir? You need to stand up and speak up. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Actually, Pat's question basically is like, if citizens are voting, there's actually the Senate actually votes for presidents. What's really like voting on citizens?
Okay. Citizens vote for their representatives. Citizens vote in a presidential election to choose the electors who will cast the official vote for president. It is not the people who vote for president. It is the states that choose the president. You need to speak up. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Which also means they could possibly cheat.
Which also means they could possibly, well, I mean, anybody can cheat if they work at it hard enough. So anyways, this is again, I don't have hard and fast answers here for you, but mail-in voting is well-known source of fraud. Non-citizen voting is absolutely vote fraud, especially in any federal election. If you are a community with a high immigrant population and you want them to be able to vote for dog catcher or leash laws, that may well be up to the local community, but I would posit that even at the state level that that voting is limited to citizens under the principles listed by Vattel, the Federalist Papers, and several amendments. All right, we've still got a bunch to go through here. The Balanced Budget Amendment, and there's a whole lot of people running for Congress who are promoting this. Is federal spending currently, at least theoretically, limited to the enumerated powers? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. In theory, they spend on all kinds of stuff that they're not authorized to spend on, and shame on us that we let them get away with this. But they are only supposed to spend on the things they have authority over. If Congress is ignoring those rules, will they obey a new rule? Duh, right? You know, I draw a line. Don't cross it. Okay, you crossed it? Then I'll draw a new line. And another one. Where does it stop? Right? It doesn't stop. A balanced budget amendment, would it actually limit spending, or would it allow more spending? If you read the balanced budget amendment that is out there, it starts from the current federal budget, which includes all sorts of things that are not enumerated powers. And if that balanced budget amendment passed, then those items that are currently unconstitutional spending that we could stop become constitutional spending that we can't stop. Oops. Congress would also then be able to waive the limits, which means we're going to ignore them for the time being. And it would also authorize a VAT or an NST, value-added tax or national sales tax. But it says nothing about repealing an income tax. The devil's always in the details. Defunding police, Sharia patrols, and socialism. What does Article 4, Section 4 guarantee? A Republican form of government. Does Sharia law come under the heading of Republican form of government? How about socialism? Is that a Republican form of government? Nope. So the states cede their authority when they let these non-Republican groups establish or take over authority. All right, you should look up at some point when police departments actually really got started and what were night watch patrols and who got assigned to those. Climate treaty. Does the federal government have authority to make treaties on any subject? No, only in areas where they've been given authority, and the federal government has not been given authority over climate. Right? May the federal government do by treaty what they are not permitted to do under the Constitution? No. All right. That's pretty much it, unless there's last questions. But just, we could take any of, 17 dozen other items of current interest or past interest and just start asking, where does the Constitution apply here? What is supposed to happen? How does that compare to what is happening? Which end is up? Anything else, guys? Yes, ma'am.
Voter ID, how does that apply?
I'm sorry, please speak up.
Voter ID.
Voter ID. That may be an area where the federal government can institute requirements in federal elections under the articles, the amendments, and the rules put in place, elucidated by DeVatel, requiring citizens to vote and allowing each person to vote only once. You have to be able to establish that it's the person that says who they say they are, and that they've only done this once. Right? There is authority somewhere in there to ensure that voting is fair. The shape it's going to take, perhaps our constitutional attorney could tell us. Magic 8 Ball says, answer hazy, ask again later. Yes, ma'am.
How are absentee ballots different than mail-in ballots?
Absentee ballots are specifically requested by a person, usually in person, but frequently by mail, going straight to the town clerk and stating that they are going to be unable to come to the polls because they're away on business, sick in the hospital, or whatever.
Validated to the person.
And at that, when they make the request, they're proving who they are, as opposed to these new groups that are just like mailing out tens of thousands of ballots to anybody that they can get an excuse and an address for. Yes, sir.
Is voting early constitutional?
The Constitution says nothing about early voting, and the states are given a lot of power and leeway as to how they choose it. But the states are also responsible to make sure that their voting is fair and not corrupted. Now, what the redress would be if the federal government could come in and prove that the state elections were unfair or corrupt. I'm not a lawyer. Yes, sir.
We also have one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. No, go ahead, go ahead.
All right. He says ladies first.
If the states vote for the president, what are the role of the citizens when we go to vote for president?
The role of the citizen when we go to vote for president is to tell the states who we want the electors to vote for. Right? I mean, they are supposed to keep in mind what the citizens want, but it is the states that choose because they are sharing their sovereignty with the federal government, so they get to pick the executive who is going to share that sovereignty with them. Yes, sir. Well, no, the one who waited. Okay.
I was wondering if I could ask a question on the validity of a law that's been passed in Maryland.
Why don't we talk about that separately, because you'll have to explain it all to me first, because I don't know about it. Mr. Affleck.
Actually, playing off the previous question, I was just wondering, so with what you said, the electors are supposed to represent the states. Let's say that state X has 3 electors, and the state votes majority A. Theoretically, all 3 of those electors could vote B if they wish.
The states put in place their own rules on how the electors are supposed to vote. For most of the states, whichever candidate wins the majority vote, that you actually are voting for separate slates of electors, right? The Republican slate, the Democrat slate, the Libertarian slate, the Green Rainbow slate, right? So whichever party wins the popular election in that state, that's the set of electors that gets to cast their votes. They are honor bound to cast their votes in accordance with law. There are a few states that split it, right? So if they've got, 4 electoral college votes and the votes exactly 50-50, you get 2 and 2. If it's 3/4 to 1/4, you get 3 and 1. But that's a state decision.
In theory, couldn't, let's say, just...
Well, actually, we're getting real close to flagpole time, so I'm happy to talk about this later, but at this point, I need to stop talking.
We need to say thank you to Mrs. White for this fabulous presentation.